and there was a lot of good, but there were also a lot of really nasty comments about me, about Black people, about Marianne Williamson, about just that I didn't think people could be so mean.
This episode is sponsored by Headquarters, where Lorelle Media offices and produces this podcast. In our humble opinion, Headquarters is the best co-working office space in Houston. It's creative, affordable, and just plain fun to work here. Headquarters, located just east of downtown Houston.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Our Voices Matter. So excited today to have with us Joy Sewing, the fashion and beauty editor of the Houston Chronicle. Let's see, you're also an author, you're a speaker, you're a radio host, you're a foster mom, and the mom of two adorable pups.
Yes.
And I say that like the biggest pups ever, right?
Big. Yes.
So Joy, it's a joy to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
You have such an incredibly eclectic background. We were just talking about the fact that you used to be a figure skater.
Yes, in Houston.
In Houston, of all places, right? But what drew you to journalism?
Wow. I've wanted to be a journalist since I was about 4 years old.
Really?
Yes.
Since 4? How did you know at 4 what a journalist even was?
My parents would get the Houston Post, and they had a mini page, like a little for children. Mm-hmm. And I loved pulling it out and imagining that I wrote whatever was on the page. I couldn't really write at the time, and I learned to just love the written word. I learned to love stories. I learned to just love the whole process. So yeah, I've always wanted to be a journalist. I didn't have a plan B.
Okay, so it's a good thing it worked out for you.
It
worked out for you.
Okay.
So you've been with the Chronicle 17 years or so?
Yeah, give or take.
Give or take, okay. And what roles have you had there before the one you have now?
So I started as a copy editor, and then I transitioned. I left for a while, moved to Mexico, did a whole roundabout, and then came back as a fashion editor. So yeah.
What do you love most about your job?
No day is the same. That's what I love. I love that it's always different. I can never predict. I also love being around journalists. I think journalists are some of the most interesting people because we all come from different backgrounds, from different places of the world, have traveled, read. I think journalists are really fascinating people.
It's interesting that you answered the question the same way that I answer the question when people ask me what I love about being a journalist. And that was the first thing for me. No 2 days were the same. Yeah. Every day it was completely different. Exactly. You got a chance to meet and interview incredible people and share their stories. Yes. And that's one of the things I love about it as well. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are about the state of journalism today and where we are given the times that we're living in.
It's a little bit scary because we are transitioning. People aren't reading the printed word as much, and we know that. And so traditional media like the Houston Chronicle and I'm sure TV are trying to find their place and their space in this world of digital journalism, where anybody can get news from all different sources now, whether they are legit or not. So I think it's really a struggle, but it's also an opportunity to grow as a journalist. I mean, I'm doing digital things that I never did before. I'm doing, I had a radio show, things that I never thought I would be doing, I'm doing now because we have really gone in different directions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, the importance of journalism as a profession. Sure. And it's interesting you say, whether it's legit or not, which means that the citizens have to be a lot more savvy and a lot more educated about the news that they're consuming and where it comes from. Sure. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. I also think that this is an opportunity for true journalists to really state what they're doing, how they're doing it, because I think in this world where people can get all different kinds of information from different sources, that there's not a lot of respect almost for real journalists. Right. And so we're having to prove ourselves a little bit more than I think we did maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to that in just a minute, but first I want to talk about some of the fun stuff. Okay. So tell me who some of the people are that you've interviewed, and if you had to pick 2 or 3 favorites, what would they be?
Oscar de la Renta, Iman, and Those are my two top.
Your two top. Why?
So Oscar de la Renta was a completely enchanting man. I don't know if you know much about his history, but he was beautiful, impeccably dressed always. And whenever I talk to a designer, I never really talk about the fashions. I always want to know their story because I think that makes for a better fashion story. And so we sat one time in a hallway, and he talked about his love for his son, and he is from the Oscar de la Renta was from the Dominican Republic, and he adopted his son from an orphanage there. And he said that his son was the darkest and the sickliest child that nobody wanted, and he adopted that child. And Oscar de la Renta talked about his love for his son. And by that time, his son was probably 25 or so.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And I always remember that story. And it's so endearing to me.
Well, yes. Well, it says a lot about who he is as a human being. My goodness.
Right.
And
Iman, I thought was going to be, well, she seems like this like diva, like real, just that you can't approach her, but she was so funny. And she talked about meeting David Bowie for the first time. It was a setup. Her hairstylist set them up.
Okay.
And she thought he was funny looking and just was not interested. And she just, it just talked about their love story. So I thought it was pretty amazing.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I know you recently went on the Oprah cruise.
I did.
So what was that like?
It's amazing. I don't know how to put it in words, but I will say it was the one time in my life where you had all these women together and no one was talking about how fat they were. They weren't talking about how old they looked. They weren't talking about any self-loathing things that we do as women. Everybody was there because of Oprah and was feeling that kind of magic. They were all happy, And
that
it was just,
magic.
That magic. And it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories from that cruise that come to mind?
So I spent some time with Gail. And I had interviewed her before, but never this amount of time. I think we talked about maybe 45 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. And she was hilarious. She's everything you think she's going to be. And she told me how Oprah was very shy, was more of an introvert. Not really shy, but more of an introvert, and how she was the extrovert in their friendship. And I thought that was pretty amazing.
I met Gail once several years ago in New York, actually at the Gracie Awards ceremony. And I fortunately had won an award that year. And Gail was there, and we had on the same dress. We had on, here's a little fashion thing, right? We had on the same dress.
Okay.
And she was just so gracious and hilarious. We kind of looked at each other and went, we have excellent taste. And then she took a photo with me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite memories of her.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit now about your year of joy.
Yes.
You're wearing the t-shirt.
Yes.
Tell us what Year of Joy is and how it came about.
So I read Shonda Rhimes' book, Year of Yes. And she is the woman behind Grey's Anatomy and all those wonderful shows, How to Get Away with Murder, Scandal. And I have a friend recommended that I read it. And I was taken aback by, here was a woman who looked like me, an African-American woman, who is at the top of her game, but had her own internal issues that she was dealing with and trying to find balance with adopting children and her job and not knowing that she didn't want to get married and things, societal pressures. And I read that book, and then when I turned the last page, I said, I'm going to have a year of joy, because I felt like I had gotten so far away from feeling joyful about just life in general, dealing with deadlines at work, pressures, all that kind of stuff. And I said, I'm going to do the things that I remember that gave me joy. And one was traveling. I had gotten away from traveling. 2 was I love to dance. And so I signed up for a tap dance class. And then I just little things like that. And it turned into an opportunity for me to give back. And I was, as you said, I was a skater. And my first Year of Joy event with children was a skating party, holiday skating party at Discovery Green. And it came about in 24 hours, and we had 45, 50 kids that year. And this year, in last December, we celebrated 3 years, and we had 150 kids the last time.
That's incredible. And so you've now turned it into a 501c3
Yes.
nonprofit. And so what's your mission?
My mission is to bring joy to children from underserved communities who don't have the opportunity to maybe go skating or maybe go to see a play or have some type of experience that I had growing up, and that a lot of children do have, but a lot of children don't. And so, because I still have my day job, I do about 4 events a year, and really smaller events, and then the big one is the skating party. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to celebrate girls and celebrate boys and to celebrate joy. Yeah.
Do you have any stories that come to mind of the impact that your skating party has had on the children? Does anybody walk up to you and say what that meant to them?
Well, so there was a little, I think he might have been 5, a little boy.
Yeah.
And he was wobbling in his skates, and he, had his saggy pants because they were wet from skating. And he hit me on my knee, and I looked down. He's like, "Lady, this is the best day of my life." And I was just like, "Oh, you're 4, okay?"
You're 4,
But just things like that, and just to see children having fun, and it's not tied to taking a test. It's not tied to anything other than just pure fun, and the fact that they're learning a skill that they never thought they could learn, like skating. And the lesson is that when you fall down, you get back up and you keep trying. And that's what these kids were doing, and that's been pretty amazing to watch.
So you shared with me that you are foster mom now.
I am a foster mom, foster to adopt. Yes,
foster to adopt. And tell us about Nova.
She's a beautiful child, and I've been. This process has been a long time coming for me. It's something I started 10 years ago, and there's just it ended up taking this long for me. But yes, I do have a foster child, and she's wonderful and challenging and strong-willed. And my mother says karma is amazing, isn't it?
I think all moms say that.
So that
she's 3.5.
She's 3.5.
Yeah.
And it's been fantastic because I had in my mind how this was going to happen. I was going to get married and have kids. You know what? When your life happens when you're not expecting it,
right?
And so that's where I am,
right? And this is where you are.
That's where I am.
And so, are you enjoying being a mom?
I am.
Yes?
I really am. I'm learning. I had to Google when I first got news of a placement. I had to Google, what do 3-year-olds eat? No, really, I did not know. I just, I was just and things like that.
Thank goodness for Google.
Yes, right? Yes, and learning from friends, like things that I needed to do that I didn't even think about. So, but it's good. I have a village of friends and family, and it's been great.
And your 2 puppies that I mentioned before.
Yes.
So Ava and
Prince.
And Prince. And you've written a book.
I did. Yes, I wrote a children's book about my rescue boxers. Everybody in my house has been like a rescue.
Right? Well, it just shows where your heart is.
Yes.
You have a big, beautiful heart.
Thank you. And so my boxers, I wrote a children's book last fall, and it debuted in October. And I've been going into schools talking about them, talking about the beauty of having a pet, being a responsible pet owner to children, how to pet a pet correctly. And Nova knows how now. You pet stop. And you wait, you pet stop,
right.
And you do gentle. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I want to get a little bit more serious now.
Sure.
and ask you to share some of your experiences personally and also as a journalist that have maybe given you some challenges,
sure.
and also made you sit up and pause and kind of think about things differently.
Okay.
I remember reading one of your articles maybe a year or so ago that followed a trip to a local church, and the author Marianne Williamson was speaking. I'm going to ask you to share what happened that
Sure.
day and why you ultimately wrote about it.
Sure. It was in January of 2018. And Marianne Williamson was speaking at Unity Church, and I love listening to her. I've read many of her books, and I did not know the topic of her talk at that point, but it was a special night because it was my birthday. And she happened to end up talking about the race divide in this country, and how we seem to be getting away from moving together and being more divisive. And she asked the members in the church who are white she asked the Black members to stand up, and there were maybe a handful. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, where's this going? I'm like, oh God, really? It's my birthday. And so I stood up, and then she asked the white people who were in the audience, who were near a standing Black person, to hold their hand or hold onto the piece of clothing or to touch them in some way. And I'm really thinking, oh my gosh, what are we doing now? And so she asked us to close our eyes, and she narrated them through an apology to African Americans for slavery, mass incarceration of Black men, rape of Black women. I mean, just all the things that have happened to African Americans in this country. She had the white people in the audience apologize for. And as I'm listening to it, I'm trying to hear her words, but something deep inside of me started to it was like an internal cry. And I broke down in tears. And I mean, literally, I had a friend sitting next to me, and she held me up because I was collapsing. And I just remember thinking about my grandmother and thinking about my uncles who are long gone, and thinking about what would they think if they heard this, how would they feel? And it was very powerful. And I hadn't intended on writing about it, but I was so moved by it. I had never experienced anything like it. I wrote about it, and it wrote about just the feeling that I had of almost relief. I didn't need an apology. I was not going in. I never ever thought I needed an apology for the way my ancestors were treated. I never thought about that. But how it made me feel was pretty incredible.
So you went on to write about it.
I wrote about it.
And I remember reading that article vividly.
Yeah.
And you got some interesting reaction. So share that.
I got the most reaction from anything I've ever written in my career. And there was a lot of good, but there were also a lot of really nasty comments about me, about Black people, about Marianne Williamson, about just that I didn't think people could be so mean and so just hurtful with their words. And I remember reaching out to Marianne, and we ended up talking by phone. We've become friends through this process, yes.
Really?
And so I ended up talking to her by phone, and she says, Joy, don't worry about that. You wrote from the heart, and that's what matters. And whenever you are on the path, on your journey, there will always be things that will try to pull you away. She said, don't be discouraged.
When you received the negative feedback, what did you do? Did you respond to it?
No. I've learned never to respond. I've learned never to respond to emails like that, never. But I did forward them all to my bosses, because they needed to know that racism is still very much alive in this country, that we have readers who are very kind, but then we have some that are very, very mean. And they needed to know.
Were you threatened at all?
Yes. Mm-hmm. There was one in particular that I was concerned about my safety. Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And so how did your bosses respond?
I think that with that particular one, we got HR involved, and just like heightened awareness that if anybody came up to the Chronicle, to be on guard. But yeah.
It just astounds me,
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, the whole conversation that's being had now, it's coming back up again about whether there should be reparations for slavery. And it's interesting, you say you never felt like you needed an apology. Mm-hmm. And yet when it was offered, it touched something in you that you didn't even know was there.
It touched my soul. It did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I never ever never ever thought that was possible, but it touched me in a way that nothing I've ever experienced has touched me. Yeah.
So I'm curious about what the reaction of the white people who were instructed by Marianne to offer this apology. How did they feel? Did you have conversations with them after the fact?
No, I didn't. But there was a white woman and her daughter sitting behind me who were holding, who were touching something of, I don't know if it was my jacket or something. And when I felt like I was going to fall to my knees, I felt them lifting me up in the back. I really did. And then I remember slightly opening my eyes and looking around the room. I wanted to see if everybody was in unison saying the words, and they all seemed to be saying exactly what she was saying. So you had a group of, 300 or 400 people who were all in line with Marianne, and that was pretty amazing.
So having been through this experience, which is really uniquely beautiful in my view, what would you say to people watching and listening who think that we just need to get over it and move on?
We don't. I mean, it's obvious we need more conversations, and we need to get to a point where we can talk about our feelings, our issues, and everything. And these are conversations we've had in our newsroom time and time again. And there are people who don't want to have this kind of conversation. Well, those are usually the people who are not directly impacted by these hurtful words and things like that. So I think we still need healing, and we have not had that.
Where do you think we start to heal?
Conversation, talking about it. I do. I think the more we talk about it, and recognize that my perspective is much different than my white counterpart's perspective. And recognize that privilege is something that is ingrained just as much as, the opposite, whatever feeling that is.
Right.
And that many white people have a sense of privilege and don't even understand that that's what they have.
Right.
And don't even understand how that impacts somebody of color. And I think in order to understand that, you have to be open, and two, you have to have a conversation. And we need more of that. And we need more of that in our newsrooms too.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that you have these kinds of conversations in the Houston Chronicle.
No,
newsroom.
we don't. Not enough.
Okay.
Not enough.
Good.
Not enough.
I'm glad you're saying
not
that because.
Enough.
So I was going to ask you, after this personal incident happened, did it lead to any further conversation among your colleagues?
I think what's interesting is that people will say, wow, that's I didn't know, that's amazing, but that's all, I think it was great for me, and I think I had a number of colleagues in the newsroom who said that they read it and they were, moved by it. But did it bring about any change? I'm not so sure.
I was going to say, what do you think? What do you wish might have happened as a result of sharing that experience and trying to move the conversation in a direction where it probably hadn't been before?
I wish we could have intimate conversations about issues like this without people getting defensive. Because the problem is, whenever we talk about diversity in the media or our coverage, there's a level of defensiveness, and that prohibits any kind of healing or any kind of really looking at it from a broader scope.
Is that defensiveness on both sides? Or
it might be. There might be a little bit. I mean, there might be some, because I've had conversations with my colleagues where I'm like, I'm tired of explaining this. I'm tired. I'm tired of explaining racism. I'm tired of explaining, sometimes I will go to an event and someone will hand me the plate. I'm tired. I mean, things like, I'm tired of explaining
someone will hand you the plate.
Yeah, I've had that happen a couple times.
Like you're the waitress?
Yes, like I'm the help. Yes. Yeah. I've had that happen a couple of times. But, I'm tired of explaining that there are still issues. I'm tired of explaining that when, Black men and the police and that this is not just an exception. This is something that is systemic in our society. And And I think we all need to, my feeling is when anyone is slighted, we're all slighted. I'm not lesbian, but if my lesbian girls out there are slighted then we all are impacted. I'm not Hispanic, but if they are having issues, and immigration, all these things, we're all impacted. This is a human conversation, not just a black-white conversation. And I think people forget that.
I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
It's the whole reason I started this podcast. Yeah. You mentioned a little while ago that you had taken some time and you'd done some traveling. Mm-hmm. And I know one of the trips that you took was to Cuba.
Yeah.
I'm interested because the headline of your article was "Don't believe what you've heard" or something to that.
Oh God, that got me in trouble too. Okay.
So talk to me about Cuba and what you learned from that experience as it relates to the human experience.
Yes. So I went to Cuba with a team of journalists who were all Black. And it was to study racism in Cuba. I took a fellowship and I was there for 2 weeks. And we basically were there to write about the history of racism in Cuba. And people will ask, well, how can Cuba be racist? And what I learned in the 2 weeks that I was there is that the darker you are, the harder your plight. And that seems to be a universal theme around this world.
Around the world.
And so it was interesting to hear their stories in this country. And mind you, everybody in Cuba is beautiful. Everyone is beautiful. And to hear their stories about just, the people who are the dark ones and the people who are the light ones and all, it just, you're floored, but then you realize this is no different than when I lived in Mexico or when I went to South Africa or when it's really no different. So, yeah.
And so you say you got in trouble was it for that headline
Yeah,
or for the story that you wrote?
Well, I think there are Cubans here in this country who, anytime you write about Cuba in a positive way or empowering way, it becomes a political conversation. And that's not what I was writing about.
Okay.
I was writing from a Black perspective, going into a country that has Black roots. And that's what I was writing about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And you say you found the same sort of themes in Mexico and in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And that is the human theme.
Yes, the darker you are, the harder your plight.
And we know that within our African American community, the same thing exists.
Exactly.
The same thing exists.
Exactly.
What was Spike Lee's movie? You know the one I'm talking about.
Yes. Black? No, that wasn't Black. No, that wasn't.
Somebody's going to tell us. I can't remember what it is, but anyway, the movie was all about. The caste system.
Was that Black? That wasn't Black Klansman. No.
No.
Oh,
back in the day. Way back in the day. Probably before you were born.
Right.
But it was one of his classic movies, and it's all about the caste system within the African American race itself. Light skinned people versus dark skinned people.
Do the right thing.
Was it? I think it was Do the Right Thing. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, it's just it's interesting, and we have so much to talk about and to try and confront and overcome. Right. And I keep coming back to this whole theme of, when a universal challenge happens, and the one that comes to mind here in Houston, of course, is Harvey, most recently. Sure. When people were literally trying to, stay above water, and many people did lose their lives. When someone comes up in a boat and offers to help you, you don't care what color they are, you don't care what their political beliefs are, you don't care what their religion is. It's how can I help you, and please help me.
Sure, exactly.
And so what is it going to take for us to hold on to that beyond the crisis situation?
Right. I don't know. I mean, I wish I had the answer to that. But you bring up a great point. We saw the beauty of humanity during Harvey. I mean, true love and kindness and people reaching out. But sometimes we just, when it's over, we go back to our lives and forget and get very segregated in our lifestyles and everything. And I don't know what I wish I had the answer. I do. I wish I did. But
I think the writing that you're doing, you write from such an authentic place,
thank you.
And you're a fashion and beauty editor, but you're a journalist, and so you can tell any story. And I love the fact that you approach your storytelling from the perspective of looking at the whole human being, not just what they do for a living. So I love the Oscar de la Renta story. I can see why that sticks out for you, because you went to the human, not the designer. Right. And that's what I think that's what we all need to get to, is to share those human stories and let people know, where we're coming from and why we think what we think. And maybe if you share something with me, I might think about it a little bit differently. Sure. Yeah.
And I think there's so many experiences that make us who we are and make our, our perspective. You brought up Mexico, and I just want to say one thing. Please. When I was on another fellowship, and I was there as a journalist to study Spanish, and I happened to go to the area where there are Black Mexicans, and it was on the coast. Slave ships came on the coast of Mexico, and so you have collections of people who were darker. And I remember walking into this small town, dusty town that was the poorest I had ever seen in Mexico. And the kids were running around, and they were all my complexion or darker, and they were beautiful kids. And you could hear in the background, they were singing "We Shall Overcome" in Spanish. And I was with another journalist, and we stopped in our tracks, and both of us just started crying. We shall overcome in Spanish. And we spent several days there, and what we learned is that how much their plight is being of African descent in Mexico, and how they are like at the bottom of the caste system in Mexico, and just the humanity in every experience is just it's been incredible. So
wow, I'm so glad you shared that story. I mean, I felt the lump in my throat as soon as you said it.
They sang it.
Wow.
And when you see these children, they're beautiful, and you're like, how do they know that song? I'm not sure exactly how they knew the song, but they sang "We Shall Overcome" in Spanish. Yeah.
Well, we have a lot to overcome, but like we've been saying, it starts with having these conversations, and I could talk to you for hours, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have you share a little bit of who you are with our audience. If there were one thing that you would want them to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I think the point of we're so kind of oftentimes look at our lives through what society deems as how we should live our lives. And I remember a friend telling me a while back, she said, your journey has never been typical. Why do you think, the decisions that you're making, or that, I thought I would be married and getting, that it would be any different. And she says, everybody has a different path. And when she told me that, I thought about it. I said, my path has been different. It's not a traditional path. And I think we have to accept the path that we're on and embrace it and enjoy it, because it will, it won't last.
It's your path.
Yes,
it's yours uniquely, and that's what makes you you.
Right.
Celebrate, embrace.
Yes.
Love who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love who you are.
Thank you. I love who you are too.
Thank you so much, Joy.
Thank you,
really
Linda.
Appreciate your perspective today. And thank all of you for watching and listening, and for giving her permission to speak, and for having the courage to really listen to some of what our guest has to offer. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for giving our guest permission to speak, and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. If the mission of Our Voices Matter resonates with you, please like, subscribe, download, and share, and then join the conversation, because it really is going to take all of us to make a difference.